What if everything you knew about productivity was wrong? What if working harder was not the answer, but thinking smarter was the game changer you've been missing all along? Today, we break open the mental vault behind Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg, a book that doesn't just promise better performance. It reprograms your understanding of what it takes to win. We're diving deep into the hidden habits of peak performers, how the world's top minds make decisions, and the rare thinking models that turn ordinary people into unstoppable forces. But here's the twist. This isn't just about learning. By the end of this episode, you will be tested. A knowledge check designed to sharpen your mind, solidify what you've learned, and elevate your thinking from passive to powerful. Oh, and there's a bonus surprise at the end. Something that could permanently upgrade how you approach every challenge from this day forward. Stick around, lock in, because what you're about to hear could permanently shift your path to success.
Ever get that feeling where you're just surrounded by information, but actually understanding what matters feels like searching for a needle in a haystack?
Yeah, totally. Information overload.
You just want someone to, cut through the noise and hand you the essential insights.
Exactly.
Well, that's precisely why we're here on the deep dive. We sift through the sources, we pull out the crucial nuggets, and kind of tailor it all so it clicks for you.
And today, we're taking a deep dive into the science of productivity. We're guided by the really compelling work of Charles Duhigg in his book, Smarter, Faster, Better.
Right.
And we've got a fascinating mix of sources, everything from personal stories to rigorous scientific studies, examples from the business world. It's quite a range.
So our mission today is to go way beyond the usual, surface level advice about managing your time.
Definitely.
We're aiming to uncover the fundamental principles of productivity, stuff you can start applying immediately to, achieve more with less effort and, crucially, less stress.
Less stress is always good.
Okay, let's unpack this. Duhigg starts by pointing out something really fundamental. The word productivity itself. It means so many different things depending on the context.
Yeah, what it looks like for an athlete pushing their limits is totally different from a scientist having a breakthrough.
Or a busy parent just trying to survive the morning chaos.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is that Duhigg manages to distill a core definition that kind of works across all these areas.
What's that?
He defines productivity as the name we give our attempts to figure out the best uses of our energy, intellect, and time as we try to seize the most meaningful rewards with the least wasted effort.
Least wasted effort. I like that.
Notice the emphasis isn't just on output, but on minimizing wasted effort and reducing stress.
Exactly. It's not about just pushing harder. It's about being smarter about how we work.
Right.
And to really get under the hood of what drives our productivity or, what can completely derail it, Duhigg shares this really thought-provoking story. It's about a man named Robert.
Yeah, Robert's story.
Yeah. After a trip, Robert just seemed to lose all his drive. He wasn't jet-lagged anymore, but he was overcome by this intense lethargy. Just flat.
Couldn't bring himself to go to work, lost interest in hobbies, reading.
Just sort of existed in front of the TV. And what struck me most was that when his doctor questioned him about these huge personality changes, Robert described them with his total detachment.
Oh, so?
Very matter of fact, the doctor said, like he's describing the weather. No emotion about it.
Wow. Robert's sudden loss of motivation is unsettling, isn't it?
It really is. Makes you wonder, is motivation this constant thing inside us? Or is it more fragile, dependent on, our environment or even our physical state?
And if someone like Robert can lose it so suddenly, what practical steps can we take to safeguard our own drive? Well, this leads us to the work of Mauricio Delgado.
Okay.
He looked into the role of the caudate nucleus. That's a key area in the brain involved in motivation.
Right, the brain science. And here's where it gets really interesting. Delgado's research revealed that when people felt they had a sense of control, even if the ultimate outcome was predetermined, they found the task more enjoyable. And they were significantly more motivated.
It's that feeling of agency. He uses this great analogy of choosing a freeway exit.
Oh, I love that one.
Right. You might take a slightly longer route, but you do it just for the feeling of being in charge of the decision. Your brain gets a little kick out of it.
So the brain likes being in the driver's seat, even if it's a small choice.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Delgado's work offers a surprisingly simple yet powerful piece of actionable advice.
Which is?
To kickstart your own motivation, actively seek out small areas where you can exert control within a task. It could be as simple as deciding where to begin a project or which email to tackle first.
Or even just choosing your workspace for the day. Anything to create that internal sense of being in charge.
Even when the final destination is set. Now, Duhigg contrasts Robert's experience with the journey of Quintanilla.
Right, the young man who felt adrift until he decided to join the Marines.
Yeah, initially Quintanilla couldn't even really explain why he wanted a simple job selling phones. He just lacked that internal compass.
And what's fascinating here is General Krulak's insight. He observed that many recruits needed more than just discipline. They needed a fundamental mental makeover.
A mental makeover. He recognized that a lack of internal drive and self-direction was a key challenge for them.
And Marine boot camp, surprisingly, wasn't just about the grueling physical stuff and getting yelled at.
No.
Quintanilla described it as profoundly emotional, focused on developing the ability to make yourself do things you didn't think you were capable of, building that inner resolve.
Interesting. And despite the notoriously low pay, the Marines have remarkably high career satisfaction.
Right. And these reforms, aimed at fostering an internal locus of control, that sense of self-direction, they've led to big improvements in both retention and performance.
It's all about cultivating self-determination by providing opportunities for choice and a sense of ownership, making people feel like they have some say.
So if we loop back to Robert, the French researcher Habib's observations provide a crucial insight here.
What did Habib find?
He noted a common emotional detachment among individuals experiencing this kind of apathy, a lack of typical emotional responses like not reacting to a parent's death or feeling the urge to hug family, just flat.
And they weren't even sad about how their lives had changed.
Exactly. So Robert's lack of motivation then might not have been a simple lack of drive, but maybe a consequence of this underlying emotional dysfunction. It's a deeper issue.
That makes a lot of sense. It wasn't just about willpower.
Okay, shifting our focus now to team productivity. Duhigg sets the scene with Julia's really sharply contrasting experiences in business school.
Yes, Julia's story.
First, she describes a really stressful study group, constant power plays, criticism disguised as jokes. It sounds utterly exhausting.
Absolutely exhausting. She felt perpetually on guard, like she had to constantly prove her worth.
Yeah, those unwritten rules of the group, the subtle competition, the pressure to always seem knowledgeable, that critical atmosphere.
It created a deeply negative and, frankly, unproductive environment.
But then, a complete turnaround with her case competition team.
Right, the second group.
Where the prevailing norms were all about genuine enthusiasm, mutual support, and actively encouraging everyone to step up and take a leadership role sometimes.
That sounds like the kind of group where real progress actually happens, where ideas can flourish.
Exactly. So we've seen how crucial internal drive and a sense of control are for individuals. Now let's see how these principles play out within a group.
Well, this contrast perfectly highlights Amy Edmondson's groundbreaking research on psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Okay, tell us more.
It's not simply about having a team full of talented individuals, though that helps. It's about the specific norms within that team. The unspoken rules that make people feel secure enough to voice opinions, take calculated risks, even admit mistakes.
Without fear of being shut down or punished.
Precisely. Feeling safe to be vulnerable, essentially.
Duhigg illustrates this brilliantly with Edmondson's examples, teams with norms of enthusiasm versus those with norms of loyalty.
Yeah, the teams where enthusiasm was the norm were far more likely to propose innovative ideas and embrace new challenges. They felt safer trying things.
And then there's the really fascinating case study of the Saturday Night Live writing team. Talk about a high-stakes, high-pressure environment.
Oh, yeah. You had this collection of diverse, often clashing personalities, Dweibel, O'Donoghue, Schiller, really strong characters.
And constant, brutal criticism was practically part of the job description.
Definitely. But what's fascinating here is that despite the inherent tensions and occasional infighting, they were incredibly effective, week after week, producing high-quality comedy under immense pressure.
So what was their secret, if it wasn't all harmony?
Psychological safety again. They felt fundamentally safe enough to continually pitch ideas, even when many, maybe most of those ideas were immediately shot down.
So it wasn't about suppressing individual egos for the group's sake.
Not really. It was more about having the security to be vulnerable, to put your idea out there, fail, and keep going. Persistence in the creative process.
And a huge part of fostering that safety came directly from Lorne Michaels himself.
Yes, his role was key. He cultivated this environment through his His keen social awareness, making sure everyone felt heard and valued, even when he ultimately passed on their ideas. He'd even indulge seemingly unusable pitches sometimes.
That makes sense. It underscores that while just shutting down debate might seem like a shortcut to efficiency,
Right, faster in the short term, maybe.
creating psychological safety in the long run unlocks far greater productivity. It encourages individual contributions and continuous learning. People bring more of themselves to the table.
Exactly. Now let's pivot a bit to the double-edged sword of automation and its impact on productivity.
Okay. Automation, good and bad.
Duhigg rightly points out the obvious advantages: huge gains in efficiency, enhanced safety in many fields. We see it everywhere.
But there's a downside.
But he also introduces a potential and often overlooked downside, something called cognitive tunneling.
Cognitive tunneling. Okay, let's unpack this. What does that mean exactly?
Think of your attention like a spotlight. That's an analogy from cognitive psychologist David Strayer.
Okay, so spotlight.
When we become overly reliant on automated systems, that spotlight can narrow too intensely. It gets focused on just what the system is doing or telling us.
And we miss other things.
Exactly. It makes it difficult to quickly shift focus or recognize when something unexpected happens outside that narrow beam. It's like being so absorbed in your smartphone that you become completely oblivious to your surroundings.
Right, you walk into a lamppost because you're texting.
Precisely. And this narrowing of focus can have really dire consequences. Duhigg tragically illustrates this with the story of Air France Flight 447.
Oh, that was awful. The plane stalled, right?
Yes. And the co-pilot, confronted with the stall alarm, instinctively reacted by pulling back on the control stick.
Which is the wrong thing to do in a stall.
Completely the wrong thing. It was a deeply ingrained, practiced response, maybe from simulator training for other scenarios, but totally counterintuitive and wrong given the basic aerodynamics of the situation.
So he was trapped.
He was, in essence, trapped in a cognitive tunnel, relying on an automatic behavior instead of engaging in critical thinking about the basic flight data right in front of him.
That's truly chilling. How automation, without careful attention, can lead us so far astray.
It really is, and it's starkly contrasted with the remarkable expertise of NICU nurses studied by Beth Crandall.
The neonatal intensive care unit nurses.
Well, yes. She discovered that the most highly skilled nurses could detect incredibly subtle warning signs in newborns that less experienced nurses often missed. They frequently acted on what they described as just a hunch.
A hunch. But it was more than that, presumably.
Oh, definitely. What's fascinating here is that these expert nurses, like the one named Darlene in the book, possessed a rich and detailed mental picture of what a healthy, stable baby should look like, sound like, even feel like.
An internal model.
Exactly, a mental model. So when something didn't quite align with that internal model, maybe a barely perceptible change in skin tone, a tiny shift in breathing patterns, their spotlight of attention would immediately zoom in on that anomaly.
It triggered an alarm bell that others just didn't hear.
Precisely. While the other nurse, maybe lacking that deeply ingrained mental model, might be focused on more obvious but ultimately less critical indicators, like a monitor reading that was still technically within normal limits.
Think of it like your internal map of a familiar city. You might not know every single street, but you have a general feel for how things connect, which helps you navigate and anticipate problems.
That's a great analogy. And in our work and lives, these mental models help us understand complex systems and make predictions about what might happen next.
So this brings us directly to this crucial concept of mental models, these detailed pictures in our minds. Building and refining them seems absolutely essential for navigating complexity effectively.
Absolutely. And the MIT study of exceptionally productive recruiters really underscores this point.
What did they find?
These top performers deliberately limited the number of projects they worked on simultaneously, typically around 5, not 10 or 15.
Okay, focused effort.
But they invested significant time in building much richer mental models of each client and candidate. They weren't just skimming resumes.
How did they do that?
By deeply engaging with information-rich emails, asking lots of questions, constantly questioning their own assumptions, and actively refining their understanding of all the nuances involved.
And this paid off.
Directly translated into significantly higher earnings. Their deeper understanding led to better matches and placements.
So the takeaway isn't about multitasking across a dozen things. It's about deeply understanding the few things you're prioritizing.
Precisely. And the story of Qantas Flight 32 really drives this home.
Another aviation story. These are powerful examples.
They really are. After the catastrophic, uncontained engine failure shortly after takeoff, pieces of the engine ripped through the wing.
It's terrifying.
The flight crew was just bombarded with a cacophony of alarms, warning lights, synthesized voices, a flood of automated computer instructions. It sounds utterly overwhelming, a perfect storm for cognitive overload.
Easy to get tunnel vision there, too.
Absolutely. It was an incredibly high-pressure situation, but Captain de Crespigny recognized that very real risk, the risk of just reacting to the loudest alarm or blindly following the automated suggestions.
Which could have been disastrous.
Yes. For example, the system actually recommended transferring fuel into the damaged wing, which could have made things much worse.
Wow. So what did he do?
Instead, he consciously relied on his deep, almost intuitive mental model of how that huge aircraft, the super jumbo A380, operates. He even vividly pictured the wings of a small Cessna, something simple he understood intimately, to help him make minute, crucial adjustments to the controls during the incredibly challenging landing.
Using a simpler model to understand a complex reality.
He essentially overrode the confusing automation with his hard-earned expertise and his clear mental picture of flight dynamics.
That's an incredible example of expertise and a strong mental model trumping automation in a crisis.
It really is. And it's such a powerful contrast to the catastrophic failure of mental models in the case of Eli Zera.
The head of Israeli military intelligence before the Yom Kippur War in '73.
Exactly. His ingrained overconfidence and his rigid assumptions about Egypt's military capabilities, they don't have enough planes, they wouldn't dare, completely blinded him to the mounting evidence of an impending attack.
He had a fixed mental model that he wouldn't let go of.
Precisely. Zera prioritized this simplified, overly confident view. He actively suppressed dissenting opinions within his intelligence team. Anyone who raised concerns was basically shut down.
So he constructed and clung to a flawed mental model, even as warning signs piled up.
Yes, his inability or maybe unwillingness to consider alternative scenarios, his dismissal of concrete concerns about Egyptian troop movements. It ultimately led to a devastating intelligence failure and significantly misled the prime minister. A failure of imagination fueled by a rigid mental model.
Okay, moving on from mental models to the realm of goal setting. We're all familiar with SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable.
Achievable, relevant, time-bound, standard stuff.
But Duhigg introduces a really interesting precursor to that. The concept of stretch goals, using GE's workouts initiative under Jack Welch as a prime example.
The workouts, right.
The core idea there was to first encourage truly bigger thinking, to prioritize ambitious aspirations first.
Kind of make it easy to say yes to initial, perhaps even slightly outlandish ideas without immediately getting bogged down in the nitty-gritty of making them smart right away. Dream big first.
Exactly. Let the ambition lead.
And what's fascinating here is the compelling evidence supporting the power of these seemingly unrealistic goals.
It actually works.
Yeah, studies conducted at major corporations like Motorola and 3M, observations in personal development areas like weight loss or marathon running, they've consistently shown that committing to ambitious stretch objectives can spark significant leaps in innovation, productivity, and overall achievement, pushing boundaries.
So it's kind of a two-stage process then.
Seems like it. First, you set these ambitious stretch goals to really push your thinking, expand your horizons.
And then you bring those aspirations down to earth by applying these SMART criteria, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, to figure out the concrete how.
Right. You need both the big dream and the practical plan. Hope isn't a strategy, but you need the hope first to fuel the strategy.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Duhigg introduces another concept that seems counterintuitive on the surface. Disfluency.
Disfluency, yeah, sounds like a bad thing, right? Like stuttering or something.
Exactly. But here, it means making information or a task slightly more difficult to process.
And that's supposed to be good. How does that work?
The idea is that it can actually lead to deeper learning, improved retention, and ultimately better decision-making.
So by intentionally making your brain work a little harder.
You engage with the material more actively and remember it more effectively. You don't just skim over it.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about Adam Alter's simple examples, like consciously trying to use a new vocabulary word in a sentence throughout the day, or reading text presented in a slightly harder to read font. Not impossible, just slightly less smooth.
Ah, okay. It forces you to slow down and pay closer attention.
Exactly. And Duhigg illustrates this principle in the context of absorbing complex data with the story of Charlotte flood.
the debt collection manager at Chase.
Right. She was remarkably successful, and her training tips for her employees seemed almost overly intricate. They required them to pay close attention to subtle cues and deviations during phone calls, things others might ignore.
Creating cognitive effort, disfluency.
Yes. And initially, other managers were quite skeptical. They believed their average debt collectors wouldn't be able to handle that level of nuanced information processing. Keep it simple, they thought.
But Flood's team, the one dealing with more complexity, consistently outperformed the others.
Interesting. So complexity wasn't the enemy there.
It seems not. This principle was also at play in the Cincinnati Public Schools Elementary Initiative.
What happened there?
Teachers were intentionally required to engage deeply with student performance data. Not just look at spreadsheets, but manually create index cards for students and meticulously track their progress by hand.
Wow, that sounds incredibly time-consuming. Definitely disfluent.
It was, deliberately so. Creating data collection and statistical tabulation, that was more time-consuming.
It worked.
It led to significant data-driven improvements in teaching effectiveness. It forced teachers to really internalize the data, not just glance at it. One teacher, Johnson, even transformed into a data-driven teacher coach because of it.
It's similar maybe to Delia Morris using the engineering design process in her high school class.
To make a decision about babysitting.
Yeah. It seems mundane, but by systematically breaking down her dilemma, pros, cons, brainstorming alternative solutions, evaluating them.
She moved beyond a simple should I or shouldn't I binary choice.
Right. She arrived at a more reasoned and objective evaluation of her situation, considering factors she might have otherwise missed.
And this deliberate process, this structured thinking, introduces disfluency by forcing a new, more analytical frame of reference. It disrupts that simplistic either thinking, makes you work a bit harder mentally.
Okay, so to bring our deep dive to a close.
Yeah.
We've covered quite a bit.
We really have. We've explored how the feeling of choice profoundly influences our motivation, how psychological safety acts as this powerful catalyst for team productivity.
The subtle dangers of over-reliance on automation, that cognitive tunneling trap.
And the critical importance of building accurate and nuanced mental models to navigate complexity.
Plus, the sort of synergistic power of combining those ambitious stretch goals with grounded, smart objectives.
And finally, the surprisingly effective benefits of introducing a bit of healthy disfluency, making things a little harder into our learning and decision-making processes.
Yeah, the overarching theme that seems to tie all of this together is clear. True productivity isn't just about putting in more hours or blindly following efficiency hacks.
No, it's much deeper than that. It's fundamentally about making conscious, often subtle choices. Choices in how we think, how we interact with others.
And how we approach our goals, and the vast sea of information that's always around us.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Consider just one area in your own life, whether it's at work, maybe a personal project, or even in your relationships.
Where might you be overlooking a crucial element of choice? A place where maybe asserting a little control could make a difference to your motivation.
Or perhaps we're consciously trying to build a more detailed mental model could provide new clarity, asking yourself, what's the picture in my head here, and is it accurate?
Maybe even think about where introducing a bit of healthy disfluency could lead to deeper understanding or better decisions, forcing yourself to slow down and think differently.
What are the guiding pictures in your mind, really?
Yeah.
And are they serving you well, or could they use a little updating? Something to think about.
If you've made it this far, you've just absorbed the transformative insights of Smarter, Faster, Better. But make no mistake, knowledge alone changes nothing. The world is moving fast. And if you're not applying, adapting, and advancing, you're not just falling behind, you're becoming irrelevant. This channel exists to protect you from that fate. Subscribe now to plug into a network of relentless learners and performers. Smash that like button as your declaration of intent, that you're done with shallow motivation and ready for strategic elevation. Everything you need, bonus tools, deep dive resources, next level insights, it's all waiting in the links below. And don't stop here. Our expert panel is about to break down these principles even further, extracting the lessons the average mind misses. But first, the moment of truth. Are you ready to prove to yourself that you're not just consuming, you're mastering? This final knowledge check is more than a quiz. It's your mental crucible. Step in, face the challenge, rise above. Because in this world, there's no room for the average, Only the smarter, faster, better survive.